Now it's time to prepare the Mini Stealthburner parts. I'm going to go ahead and install these heat inserts. You need about 8 of them for this section, and we're on page 151 in the manual. There's a call out about the soldering iron temperature, and yeah, you're going to be getting really close to these parts. If you want, you could also put some tape there to help protect the part. I also showed a trick on using a screw and a lighter if you're nervous about melting plastic. Yeah, and since this one is, I can tell that my barrel might hit the part, I'm going to be a little more conservative. And instead of using the soldering iron, I'm going to use my long M3 screw with the lighter trick. Hold it for at least 10-12 seconds, which it has been. And then you're going to take it and just gently set it in, and you want to get it all the way flush. So that trick works quite well. If you don't get it on the way, you might have to touch it up with, you can get your screw really hot and push it down some more. All right, nice and hot. And then we've got one more to do, which is this bottom one here. That was just a pretty awkward angle. So yeah, you put your soldering iron in there, that's going to be, you're going to have a good chance of melting that plastic if you're not careful. So I like doing the screw trick. Okay, nice and hot. And that is good to go. The other nice thing about doing it this way, you can make sure that your screw's going to be nice and straight and it goes in just right. Now this piece here is easy enough, so you can just use your regular soldering iron for it. Okay. The manual calls out making sure you get a good bond here, and that's fine. I mean, I think as long as you're doing it with the right temperature, you should get a good bond. Once it cools down, if you want, you can test that bond to the plastic and just make sure that you can't pull it out. And now we've got these little pieces here which are going to allow us to mount the motors. Just go ahead and get these done. These go in on all ends of it, and you're just going to push them in there and get them flush. I think the easiest way to do this is just to set it in and hold it down. Okay, there's one. I'm going to do the other one and then I'll flip them. Let them cool down a second. Brass does tend to keep its heat, as you probably know from 3D printing. So just be careful when you're letting these cool off a little bit before you flip them. And now I'm just going to flip these over now that they've cooled down a tiny bit. And make sure you go all the way flush. For this part, you're going to need 3 more inserts, and they're just going to go, you'll go here, here, and here. And you're also going to need a M2x6 flathead screw. I'm going to go ahead and do the screw first. It says we're going to use this later for adjustment. And try to get it as straight as you can. Now this one, I'm going to do my screw trick because it's got that plastic surrounding it. So I'll start with that one. And aim for it nice and straight. That feels good. Got it flush, that's the important part. And I'm going to use my soldering iron for these two. One's in. And we'll just do the last one here. Okay, that one's in as well. And I actually almost forgot these two on the bottom. So there are 2 more, just these outside 2 that are going to need it. I'll go ahead and set those in. Just watch as you're putting them in. You don't want to get them angled. I think I'm good there. For this step, we're going to be using the bondtech gears and starting off with the needle bearings, which are these guys here. And really what you want to do is you just want to get a little bit of lube on here. Go ahead and just get everything kind of lubed up, including the needle bearings. And then you're just going to slide it over like that onto the bearing. And while you're doing that, make sure that you are careful and don't lose any of the needles on the side here, because that's not what you want to do. So go ahead and just insert those in. And then after you do that, everything's lubed up pretty well and you can insert it into here. It's a good idea just to make sure, you put a little extra layer on here if you want, It's not going to hurt having a little extra, but you want to make sure everything's all fairly lubed up. For the next part, I'm going to use a M210 self-tapping screw, and I'm going to insert it into here. So once you've inserted it, come on in. I know these Geidler parts, a lot of people had problems with the strength of them or broke them or whatever. I never did, so just make sure it goes all the way in and nothing's sticking out past this plastic part. I think you'll be good. Now that we have that in, we're going to insert this gear. The wide end of the gear is going to go in the recess here. So I don't really think you can even insert it any other way. But it should snap into place like that. So you got your M210, and then the wide is the opposite side of that. And it's going to move around a little bit like this. Now the next part, you want to take your bondtech gear, and you want to put your jig on top of it and check it. Now mine, I've already done the work, but you do not want this metal end here on the short end to be protruding past this. If you do, things aren't going to fit together, right? So what you can do is you can take some sandpaper and you can just work that down. Just kind of sand it down until it's flush with the plastic part. And after you're done sanding and clean everything up, just go ahead and double check that your bearings fit okay on the end of the shaft on either side. And don't force them on there if they don't. So mine fit fine, so I'm going to go ahead and take them off. And we're going to use that in a later step. And for this next step, we're going to need some super glue, an M3 hex nut, and one of these bearings. So the bearings you're just going to set right in here. And it should kind of be a tight fit. If it's too tight, you might have over extruded. I wouldn't recommend sanding it. I would recommend reprinting the part because you're probably going to have issues here too. For the M3 nut, the manual says that it's critical that this doesn't come out. So you can kind of fit it in there, but see it's going to come out. So they recommend using this this super glue here. So I'm just going to go ahead and very carefully apply some super glue in here. You probably don't need a ton. Probably about like what I did. Then go ahead and just drop your nut in there, and it ain't gonna take long. That should dry into place. Feel free to wipe it up. I went ahead and wiped up the excess there. Mine's dried a little bit, and it's definitely not going anywhere, so I think we're good to move on. And when you're doing the super glue step, really try to avoid getting any in the bearing, so you may want to do the nut before you do the super glue. Moving along, I'm going to drop in this MR85 bearing into this spot here. Of course, it's going to be a little tricky to get in, so I'm just going to use a tool. And to press that in, make sure it's flat. You can use I think this is the right size driver, this M2 driver here. And once that's in, it's not going to come out easily. Make sure that it's in there good. It's maybe a little crooked, so I'm going to keep working it down a little bit more. You want to be careful though and not go top down like this, because you can damage the bearing on the sides if you do it that way. Yeah, that looks good. If you can't get the bearing in because there's too much plastic, you've probably over extruded. And now that the bearing is in, we're going to go ahead and lay the shuttle in, which is this piece here with the heat insert. And it should fit right there like that. And then after that, we're going to insert the Geidler, which is this piece with the gear. And this is going to go in like that. And that's just going to kind of lay in between here. And then we're going to insert this latch piece here. So this has nothing in it. And it's going to be oriented like this. It's going to go right over this, like that. So that's how everything kind of fits together. We've got all this laid out, and at this point, we haven't put any screws in it yet, and that's on purpose. So we're getting there. The next thing you're going to do is set this piece in. So before you install the mid body here, you're going to need these M325s. You're going to need 3 of them. And this is where it's all going to hopefully make sense. So this should lay in right like that. And then we're going to go ahead and do these top 2 first. The order doesn't really matter a whole lot. It should fall into place. There we go. If it doesn't, you might have to jiggle things around a little bit. But those are all just kind of dropping in. And we'll go ahead and tighten those down. And the manual specifically says not to over tighten this one. I wouldn't over tighten any of them, but you got to be extra careful there. So just do them finger tight. So once you get a little bit of resistance, then you're good. Yeah, see, that can still move pretty freely. If you get it too tight, this may not be able to move quite right. And these ones here can be a little misleading. Actually, all of them can, because they are recessed into the plastic a little bit, so make sure you're going down far enough. Even the Skydler is the same way, but it's not recessed quite as much as these. And don't forget these bottom ones. So these need M310s. You're gonna put the M310s right in there and tighten them down. It's probably useful to use a driver like this. So I'm gonna get my M310s out to put them in these holes here. These should be able to drop right into place. Here we go. Tighten right up. Nice and tight. To prep this next part, I've got my bondtech here. I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite or blue Permatex, whatever you got, on this. So just get a good helping on there. And next up, I'm going to insert this gear onto the end of it. And after you insert it on there, just go ahead and slide it forward. And then now that we've got that in there, we can go ahead and we don't have to worry about the screw just yet. We're going to adjust that later. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. Should drop in pretty well. Seems like it went in just fine. One thing that I would recommend though is it's probably not a bad idea to tighten it a little bit before you do that, because you want to make sure this is sitting on the flat of the shaft. So see how there's a flat right there. I'm going to go ahead and get that tightened just so I know that I'm in the right ballpark when I go to adjust it later. So now it'll stay positioned when I have it like that. So it will move around, but it's not going to adjust too much. Now we're going to put the back cover on. We're going to use two M3x6 screws, and you're also going to need an M3x10. The end of this shaft is going to sit on this bearing if everything's right, and it should fit into place and line up just right. We'll do the M310 first, and that's going to go in the bottom right. That one's a little bit of a deeper screw. Don't over tighten these, make sure that you get them just right. We'll do the M3.6 on the top here. And remember, you've got a little bit of a recess here for that one. And then we've got our M3.6 here. And that should be good. That's what yours should look like. On page 160 of the manual, you can see that it wants you to check to see if anything's rubbing. We're going to try and center this a little more. We're going to use a piece of filament to do that. So right now mine isn't rubbing, but it's pretty darn close to this piece. So I think we want it should go a little bit more. And the only way we're going to get that is probably by doing some adjustments. You also want to make sure you can do those adjustments with your Guidler door. So I would just, for now, just insert this piece so you can pull it back. But we're going to be potentially adjusting the little screw here. And we're also going to be tightening down the bearing. And just to check this, you're going to need a piece of filament. I just got some ASA. You can see just kind of how that's running and moving. It's pretty good. Okay, so I've got the filament in here. I've played around with this a little bit. All I did was I took my driver and I adjusted the screw left and right a little bit, and I got it lined up right where the filament is in the center of that gear. There's a small indentation in there, and you really want it as centered as possible. Hopefully you can see that. So the filament needs to be centered within the gear. And that's how mine looks. Now I'm going to go ahead. I'm pretty happy with that. My plastic gear is a little more centered as well because I jogged over the gear a little bit towards the back. Remember, earlier on in the step, I didn't tighten it, but I made it tight enough where it's not going to rotate, so it stays on that flat. So that's what you want to do here. And now that I've got it in position with this nice and centered, I'm going to go ahead and snug it down. This is how I've got mine in there. I went ahead and tightened this down nice and tight. It's pretty much centered over that groove, although it's kind of hard to tell. But see how that's nice and centered there? That's what you want. Double check this. This should not be rubbing against the plastic at all, which mine is not. So everything looks to be going pretty good. Make sure that you get that screw nice and tight, and then it's not protruding, because you don't want anything hitting either. I think I'm in good shape here. Everything's nice and smooth. Now I do notice when that closes, it kind of makes a little bit of an annoying noise. Put a little bit of pressure on that arm. I don't get that weird noise, so I'm good. The next step is to put the tension arm on. And I've got the spring. Unfortunately, I lost the washer, but I don't think the washer is super critical. But if you do have a washer, put it on here. And then we're just going to go ahead and tighten that up. And everything should insert nice and smooth. And you are going to go fairly tight. Now on some of the, on the original Mini Afterburner, they recommended that you drill out maybe clear these out a little bit. So if you are having any kind of rubbing on here, or maybe you don't think it's going through quite enough, just open it up with a drill bit maybe, or even just a small file would work. Mine seems to be pretty good, so I'm not going to bother with it. But you want to make sure this is flowing nice and easy. If you're not getting a good feed here, when you put it together, you're definitely not going to get a good feed when you go to print, and that will cause print issues. The manual tells you to check for teeth. I don't know if you can see that on mine, but I do have a little bit of markings, late teeth markings on mine. So you can see this part did not go through yet, so it's smooth. This part did go through, and there's real faint, kind of like the little gears. You can tell where they bit into the filament a little bit. So that's what you want to see. Now we're going to be installing the 3010 print head fans. This is on page 165 of the manual. Make sure that when you install these, the blowers are going to be coming, it's going to be facing down here, and the air will be flowing through here and on this side. First thing we're going to install is this one, and there is kind of a specific way that you're going to be managing the wires as well. These should just slide in, and be careful when you're pushing them in. Don't push real hard on that, and just be very gentle with it. You don't want to break your fan while you're trying to install it. Okay, there we go. And if you do need to get them out, you can use these little holes on the end and just kind of back them out, again, gently, so they can be removed. And now for this next fan, you need the 3010 fan, and your sticker most likely is going to be facing you, which is the direction the air is going to blow, and that's going to blow onto the hot end. Now when you install this, make sure that you pay attention to how the wire goes in. And basically, the wire is you're going to set the fan in like this, and the wire is going to come from this side here, and it's just going to naturally kind of fit through this guide like that. So it's going to lay flat on the plastic and fit up through this wiring guide, this wiring channel here. So on this fan, you want this side, you want the sticker to be on the inside just like the other fan, and you're going to use that same channel. So go ahead, and then you want to make sure your blower, where the air comes out, is on the bottom. So just set that wire in there like that. Be careful not to pinch anything. And then carefully set it into place. And with any luck, yeah, before you push it all the way down, make sure that none of the wires are sticking out here. And you should have enough clearance for this to go all the way in. I'm just trying to position mine. Okay, and then on this one, if you do need to reposition it, you can grab the hole with your tool and pull it out, or better yet on this one. So that's how those should look. Make sure those wires are coming through. For the most part, this should not be covered. So that's the fans. Now you're going to need your pancake motor. I'm going to use the LDO 36 TH20. One of the most important steps that's not really called out, it's visually there, but you have to pay attention. You got to make sure that your wiring here is at the top, and you need 2 M310 screws. We're going to do the left hand side one first, and go ahead and just put it in there somewhat tight. Don't get real tight on it, because we are going to be doing some adjustment. Okay, so I went all the way down and I backed it off a little bit. And the next step is going to be on the gearing, so it doesn't hurt to take this off. Go ahead and remove your latch as well. Mine's a little tight, but you can file that down if you want to, if yours is tight like mine. So go ahead and put this in lightly. And then we're going to just go all the way in and then back it off a half turn. So we're going to need to adjust that. Now you're going to need to kind of feel this. So all the way up, it's kind of barely moving. All the way down, it's really engaging with the mesh. So I want to be somewhere in between. And I think for me, somewhere in the middle is good. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that. This is definitely more of an art than a science, because you're doing it by feel. So I went ahead and tighten that one. I'm going to tighten this one. I'm going to check the feel of it. That feels pretty good. It's definitely engaging. It's not too loose. If it's too loose, it can cause premature wear on the bondtech gear, and you don't want that. So I think I've got it just about right. I'm going to look in here, just double check that everything looks good, and I'm going to go ahead and test my filament again. I'm going to insert that in, and it should still be centered, and I should be able to just kind of hold this together, and I should see the filament moving, which I do. And when I look at it, it still looks nice and centered in that gear. If you see anything off there, now's your chance to adjust it again. You can just go ahead and put these on. This isn't really required yet, but I'll do it. Now we're at the point where we want to install our hot end. I'm going to be using a Dragon. I had this on my original V0, and I think it's a pretty good hot end. I don't have any issues with it. You might be using a Revo or something else, but the steps are going to be the same, although they may not look exactly alike. So on the Dragon, I'm planning on mounting it like this. So in order for this to fit in, I would recommend dry fitting it. So it's going to connect here, and then the hot end wires are going to need to be towards the back, and your logo and your heat sink or heat sock is going to be facing the front. That's why I had it on my original V0.1, and there is going to be a little bit of a bend on these wires. Just be really careful so you don't break them. And I don't think it really matters which side your thermistor's on. I'm going to have both of mine coming out the same side, and I believe I'll have plenty of room for that. Okay, you are going to need some M25 by 8s if you are using the Dragon hot end. It took me a little while to rummage for these, but I did find them in the original Dragon hot end box, so that was a good thing. So otherwise I would have been having to order some screws. So when you put this together, make sure this is facing you, and then I'm also going to rotate this in such a way that the hot end wiring is oriented and thermistor are coming out like that on the side. I'm going to try and go ahead and tighten this down, and I'll do the PTFE here in a minute, but yeah, that all comes up nicely. So that's how that should look. For the next step, you're going to take your PTFE tube, make sure it's as flat as you can get it. There's different cutters out there. These are pretty good, these Capricorn ones. The other one that I like, I actually made this one, 3D printed it, and I think I get a little bit flatter cut with this one, so I'm going to use it. And I just press it, so that's nice and flat. Now I'm going to insert it into the Dragon, and the Dragon does not go very deep. It's like there's just barely a lip on there, but some hot ends you'll have to insert it down further. So I pushed it in there as hard as I can go. Okay, now after you've inserted this all the way in, go ahead and slide your jig on top. This is the same one we use for the motors, and this is gonna make sure that you have your the proper length that's gonna go insert into the piece here. And then I'm just gonna get like a little X-Acto knife or something and cut it flush right there. The other thing I could do is mark it and then cut it with my cutter, but I'll go ahead and so just take your X-Acto knife and flip it this way so you can lay it flat. And then I don't recommend just pushing all at once. It's better to kind of saw away at it because you don't want to crush it. So we're just going to kind of do that, saw at it. There we go. I should have something that looks like that. Hopefully it's flat, both coming up and going down. It's really important to make sure this goes all the way down. If it doesn't, when you're printing, you can have issues where this will kind of go up and down, and that'll cause retraction and flow issues, and your prints won't look good. Now, to put this in, really all you need to do is slide it forward. And just line it up. Make sure that PTFE is lined up correctly into the hole, and then just slide it on in like that. And while you're doing that, make sure you're paying attention to these wires. You don't want them to get pinched or broken. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and install the carriage here with the M3335s onto this, onto the carriage. And I did notice these guys are going to have to be trimmed. I thought I could get away with a little bit of a nub there, but it doesn't look like it's. There we go, that's flush enough. And when you're doing this, you should be able to eye it up. And the goal is just to get it in. Here we go. And make sure that hopefully you have your M3 square nuts in there, or hex nuts. Because if you don't, they're not going to lock into anything. When you're doing this, make sure that nothing is getting pinched in the back. All your wires should be off to the side. Actually, looks pretty good. And before we go much further, I want to go ahead and sink an M316 in the back of the carriage here. With a little bit of a hole right under the motor. You're going to want to get that nice and tight. Now you shouldn't have much wobble when you check your tool head. And it's really pretty stable there. So there's really no play in it, which is what you want. So in order to run CAN, you're going to need this connector here. And it's going to be running 24 volt, the red and black. And it's also going to run a CAN wiring for communication. And that's going to eventually hook up to this, this device here, which is a transceiver. And this connects then to the SKR Pico. And I'll go through the wiring later.